Ninotschka Titchkosky. I'm the co-CEO of BBN. We're an architectural practice, and we have about 360 people. Our two sort of main studios are in Sydney and Brisbane, and we also have footprints in New York and London. And as a practice, we really do all kinds of projects, from incredibly little ones to very big ones, like over the $1 billion sort of scale of project. And we do kind of work across almost all sectors, and in a way that's something that we really value, because we do a lot of kind of cross-pollinating between our knowledge of sectors. So, and I'm an architect as well, probably been an architect for nearly 30 years. So.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're talking about the Atlassian Tower today, and perhaps one of the coolest, well, it is the coolest mass timber project in the world, and I'm sure just in just more generally across buildings. So what was your reaction when this brief came in? And tell us from the beginning about the brief and sort of the process when something like this lands on your desk.
Yeah, well, it was, I guess this actually started, nearly 7 years ago. So the competition was actually in 2016, which seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? And and at that time, Atlassian was sort of really gaining strength in the market as one of Australia's kind of leading tech companies. They were very much in that growth period. And certainly kind of a bit risk-taking, which is awesome. But they had been working with government, New South Wales government, for a little while around bringing this whole new precinct to life in Sydney, which is called the Tech Precinct. And the intent of the Tech Precinct is to sort of create a hub for technology-driven businesses that's close to the universities, very close to Central Station, that would help kind of drive the economy as well. So it was very much a kind of government-backed initiative, and they saw Atlassian as like the key anchor tenant in that, or sort of key anchor for the precinct that would bring others to it. And so they set about creating a very ambitious vision for the project, which was pretty rare that you get a brief where the ambition is so high. And actually they'd done a fair bit of pre-work on it to just ensure that that vision was actually going to be deliverable, at least in concept. So, the brief was to create essentially a 40-story hybrid timber tower. And one of the key things that they needed to do to make sure that was actually achievable, even in a competition mode, was to do some background work on the structural engineering and some of the fire engineering solutions and some of the climatic solutions. So there was a fair bit of pre-work actually done, which is very unusual in a brief, that we could then take and build from. And so we joined forces with shop architects from New York, and sort of came at the competition as a combined team. And that was in 2016.
Oh, fantastic. That's so cool. So what are the things at the very start to get right? You mentioned it's an ambition that's perhaps a bit unusual in construction, so there are things that slightly a little bit different. What are the things from the very beginning that you need to get right when you're doing a project of innovation of this scale?
Well, I think probably the most fundamental is a client that's willing to, put the hard yards in and actually stay courageous through the project. Because I think that's in the end, there's always reasons why to give up along the way as the project gets kind of harder and harder and you're trying to jump the hurdles. So that's probably number one. I think number two is just getting the best people around you and the best team around you. And we really had like an incredible global team, and we have people from all over the world kind of working on the project, whether it was the climatic engineers or the fire engineers, or the structural engineers. We've got architects in Australia, architects in New York. It was this really multidisciplinary, very large team. And we actually ended up having to do most of the design work online, collaborating online together, because it happened all through COVID. So once the competition was won, and we actually started the project proper, we actually only had one full team meeting together in New York. and then we were online for like 2 years, doing the most of the design work together. So that was certainly a bit of a challenge. The other things to set up, I guess, are yes, really good collaborative environment, super important. And then obviously we set up a lot of methods because we were working online together and we were this kind of global team. We did set up some pretty good methodologies of how we were going to share documents and share design information. So we got very good at like setting up all our design presentations through Google Slides and doing shared decks, doing sort of 24-hour cycles of turnaround of design time. The whole project's all obviously set up in BIM 360. So we've got full shared 3D models, and so on. So there's the sort of setting up the right framework for the project is super important, just in the sort of more the day-to-day doing. But then it's equally really important to just have that client with the conviction of what they're trying to achieve, and then everyone absolutely bought into the vision. And so kind of being guided by that shared vision was very important.
Well, I might drill down a little bit further on that. So most projects in the past, you could maybe have design meetings where you catch up once a week. But I'd imagine if you did it the old way, you'd have a huge, so many people in the room. To sort of BIM 360 enable sort of a lot more ease between disciplines and everyone just sort of working on their unknowns and then sort of coming together compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, we were really kind of on almost like a daily cycle of collaboration. Like, it was quite intense, to be honest. And there was, I think by the end of the couple of years, it was pretty exhausting. I was quite exhausted because we were all also trying to match time zones and things like that, was really hard. I mean, the other piece in the puzzle, which came a little later, but is just the collaboration with the contractor as well, which is also really important in how the whole process rolls. And so we're working with Built Obiashi, and they've been really important as well, and it came on quite early to help us kind of work through a lot of the risk issues and things like that. But also, like, the other part of the collaboration process that was really important was the cost planner, and also tracking some of the key brief issues. So we had like a few of the key brief things that we're looking to target is 50% less embodied carbon, 50% less operational energy, and 100% renewables. And in terms of the embodied carbon, like, we were actually sort of real-time tracking that through the design process. And so we'd often have the cost planner who was actually doing some of that work in collaboration with this the sustainability gang. And so the way that everyone was kind of pitching into the design process, it wasn't just like an architecturally driven thing. It was really kind of everyone was kind of continuing to add their pieces to the puzzle as we were developing kind of the overall design.
Yeah, and I believe can you let me know if the embodied carbon side, was that including offsets or not including offsets? And maybe can you just drill down on that? We don't have to talk only about timber, but across everything embodied carbon more generally, and how that can be achieved.
Yeah, sure. So those targets were actually set up in the brief. So 50% less embodied carbon, and it's 50% less embodied carbon of a similar building type built on that site. And so the reason for that is that there are some particular anomalies about the site itself, which we can go into a little bit later, but that mean that you couldn't just sort of say, oh, well, it's just the equivalent of a greenfield building, that's 40 stories high. But what it actually is, it doesn't target every aspect of the project. What it really looks to is structure, facades, and sort of groundworks, basically. So in order to kind of achieve that, the things that we need, well, first of all, I guess the idea of the hybrid timber tower gives us a concrete core, a steel exoskeleton, and then essentially the way the building works is it's sort of divided up into habitats which are 4 stories high, and every 4th story is a steel and concrete floor, but in between that is like a little mass timber village. So everything in between that is made of mass timber, and then every 4th floor is a structural floor, which is also our fire compartmentation. So we were obviously going to get some great outcomes with embodied carbon for the mass timber. For the concrete, you know, we had to really look carefully for the mix of the concrete and look for a low geopolymer mix. And then for the steel, we're effectively manufacturing the steel offshore so that we can use a low embodied carbon steel. So we can't buy green steel in Australia, and you know, there's really no sort of, at the moment, there's no kind of great alternatives for that. So we had to, we're getting the steel from overseas. So that, but even with all of that and with the transport, it's still giving us a better outcome. But it's also about scrutinizing, you know, how you optimize the materials, what don't you need. So do less, you know, do more with less. You know, we're really kind of looking at the sort of gauges of steel, the extent of concrete works, all that kind of stuff played into the picture.
So what are some of the major challenges that you've faced so far, or currently, you know, being faced, that you've had to overcome on this project?
Well, I think there are so many, it's kind of crazy, but one of the sort of really, I guess, so it's hard enough to build what's currently sort of mooted to be the world's tallest hybrid timber tower, even if it was just on a very simple site. But we're actually doing this on the very edge of Australia's busiest rail corridor, and we're actually having to build on a site which has an existing small heritage building. So it's kind of like, could we make it any more complicated? And we're in a heritage precinct. So it's just, in levels of complexity, it's kind of like the crazy order of level of complexity. So that's certainly been like a massive challenge. And that's just meant that there's lots and lots of stakeholders that are involved in the project. You know, there's lots of eccentricities about building on a rail corridor, which means, you know, there's like all the kind of particular things that transport's looking to achieve, the amount of people that are going to be moving through the site. That's certainly been a huge challenge, just dealing with the site, the actual site issues. The other ones probably are also the fact that, you know, it's something that hasn't really been done before globally. So the level of rigor that you have to go through to kind of ensure that the risk profile's not too high is pretty significant. And then particularly one of the big ones is really fire issues. So ensuring that we're meeting all the fire codes, and that's why we've got the sort of 4-story habitat model, which helps us deliver on that. They're some of the big ones, but yeah, there's sort of 1,000 little ones as well.
Well, that leads to my next question, Ninotschka, and that's around the building approvals process. Of course, everyone's mind goes to fire at a building of this height. How did you bring everyone along the journey and actually get everything approved and reduce the risk in the appropriate ways?
Yeah, well, the approvals process is actually really complex, and it in fact is sort of an ongoing process that we continue to participate in as the design keeps evolving. But just to sort of clarify where we are with the project at the moment, so the hole's been dug and we're actually on site, which is great. So that's pretty exciting. So things are really kind of heating up now. But the approvals process was very complicated. This project is what we call a state significant approval process, and it means that we had to have the City of Sydney, we have to have transport, heritage, the designing with country overlays, government architects. Like, we have a very kind of large group of authorities that we have to meet requirements on. And then, so that process was very much like a constant process of presentation and so on, as we were developing the design, and then they provide feedback, and then we would continue to evolve. Now we're in the period of, we're pretty much just, there might be some minor changes, and we're just circling back through those with them. But in terms of like authorities like fire and so on, also that has been complex as well. But the main thing is with these projects is that you stay really transparent and open, that you can't sort of hold everything to you and then sort of all of a sudden launch it on everyone and think that, you're going to get the answer you're looking for. So I think that understanding the key issues from all the different kind of authorities' perspective, and then trying to ensure that we're meeting those, but also bringing them into the design process a bit so they understand sort of where we are in the process and what we're trying to achieve. Of course, with a project like this one, the fact that the government is actually backing the precinct, and it's something that, they're looking, they really want to drive as part of the kind of economy and the success of New South Wales, that does help us a bit, but it certainly doesn't relinquish us from, having to meet all of those stringent requirements.
Fantastic. And in a second, I'm going to ask you a few more generic questions about the industry going forward. So is probably my final question on this building. So I'd like to just know, how does this building reflect your values and your mission, and just your overall pride about what's being built going forward, and how it's going to change things in Australia?
Yeah, Atlassian's such a interesting project because it does really, I think it will really reset globally what we can expect from commercial buildings and new buildings, and not just in terms of our environmental goals, but also just the way that we create communities within tall buildings, and also the way that we think about how we optimize the unique conditions of place wherever we're working. So, we have a very sort of clear goal as BVN in terms of working towards a net positive outcome for projects. And so Atlassian is definitely in the sweet spot of, aligning to our sort of bigger practice goals. And I think when we are faced with, an industry that's contributing 40% carbon emissions to the planet through construction, it's really all of our imperatives to start to kind of think differently about how we design, how we build, how we kind of start to pull waste out of projects and things like that. So Atlassian, I really hope it is sort of part of a reset, and that it actually, provides a bit of a North Star for other developers and other clients who are like, oh, I can see that I can actually achieve this. Like, I can set ambitious targets and it does pay off. And yes, it's hard to do, but in the long run, it actually gives us a future-proofed outcome. And it, we set our standards a whole lot higher than what they are at the moment.
And forever, timber's been used in that low-rise 1 to 2 stories, and maybe the last 10 to 15 years it's pushed 3 to 8, and now it's seen 40 stories. What do you see as the feasibility from now going forward of mass timber in the high-rise space?
Yeah, it's super interesting actually, and there's some really nice projects happening all over the place that are starting to, it's a bit like an arms race. I feel like let's ratchet it up. Come on, how high can we go? Obviously, we'll hit a tipping point where 40 stories in timber makes no sense, because you're going to have huge sections and things like that, which is hence the hybrid. But for sure, there's a building actually, the Ascent Tower, that's just been finished in Wisconsin in the US, and I think that gets up to 25 stories. It's about 86 meters high. And there's another one that's, I know, on the books for Switzerland, which is looking to be 100 meters high. So, it's people are really starting to push the boundaries, and a bit more, I guess there's some more work being done around thinking about slightly hybridizing or augmenting some of the timber so that it can actually like increase its strength grades and so on, which is giving us some new opportunities to like get the height up. I think actually, interestingly, our studio in the UK has just moved into what they say is the tallest timber building in London, and it's significantly lower than those two. So I think there's a bit more work to do in the UK. They're not quite as courageous, maybe, as some of the rest of us, but in Australia, we're pretty good. I think there's a level of sort of absolutely level of willingness to just go for it a little bit, and I think it's paying off for us, which is really nice. So I do think mass timber will continue to grow, and it'll become more and more, less and less, if you like, scary for people. And I think also what's important is that particularly cost planners, project managers, those people that are kind of directly advising the clients, getting more across the procurement process and the costing and the fact that it's actually not a really high profile risk option. So quite often we found in the beginning, sort of 6 or 7 years ago when we were doing our first mass timber projects, that was a real barrier for the industry where, even though the architects would be trying to get the projects up, they'd get stopped at that point. And it was particularly because, to some extent, if you're not familiar with something, you kind of attach a lot of risk to it. Actual fact, our experience has been, working with timber, it's like the cleanest site that you can work on. You can reduce your labor by, 60% or more sometimes compared to a conventional build. Like, it's pretty extraordinary. And then obviously you've got the kind of beautiful biophilic and sort of human aspects of occupying timber buildings, which people just always love.
Absolutely. So tell us about what you see as the future of construction in the next 5 to 10 years. It doesn't have to be specific on timber again, just more generic where things are going, do you think?
Well, this is a bit of a hot topic for me, and I guess what I'd like to talk about is where I'd like it to go. Whether we get there or not, I think, is another matter. But at the moment, construction is one of the lowest, one of the industries that has the least productivity out of any of the major industries that make up the GDP of countries. And that really hasn't changed, which is incredibly woeful when industries like manufacturing have sort of rocketed nearly to the top. And part of the issue is that we're just not changing the way that we're doing things. And so, my hope is that if we want to decarbonize the construction industry and we want to take out time, we want to reduce time, take out the cost of wastage, reduce the cost generally, and also just sort of reduce the amount of resources required, we really need to think differently. And I don't think it's just incremental change. I think it's radical transformation that we need to do. And a large part of that, in my mind, will come from integrating digital technologies, robotics, advanced ways of building, where we're actually getting away from just sticks and sheets, and we're starting to think differently about how we build, and also the way that the process works, which is time intensive. There's a lot of waste in it. If we can just do so much better. So my sort of hope is that we can genuinely start to think differently about how we do things as an industry. And in doing so, we'll solve a lot of the challenges that currently exist as well, which are, the margins are low for contractors. There's labor shortages, productivity is low. There's a lot of wastage. Clients are paying a lot. So there's a range of different factors which should drive us to change. And my hope is that by doing all of that, we'll actually be able to create those net positive outcomes, and also sort of push the boundaries of the materials that we're also using, and make sure that we are being much more robust around material selections and embodied carbon in materials.
That's a great note to end it on. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Ninotschka. If people want to find out more about yourself or BVN, or they got a project and they want to build another Atlassian Tower or anything like that, where should they go?
Oh, thanks, Adam. Yeah, you can come to me, but you can check us out on bbn.com.au, and you can find our contact details on our website. But anyone that wants another one of these crazy ambitious buildings, like, bring it in.